On this episode of the Philosophy Society podcast, I talked to second year philosophy student Daniel Defendi. We discuss freedom of speech, the impact of social media, when and how we should listen to authority figures, and the need to balance technological development with wisdom. But most importantly, well, at least in my opinion, was Dan's message to live with conviction. In a world of uncertainty, how can we do this? To answer this question, I bring you Daniel Defendi. And you're off social media.
Yeah.
Why are you off social media?
Yeah, so that's good question. I've always really disliked the idea of social media, and I felt like I really wanted to live in a more convicted way. You know, like I think...
What do you mean by convicted?
So to follow your convictions is to say, I believe something, so that's what I'm going to follow through for in my life. I'm going to take those values or whatever I tell myself I believe in or I think is right, and I'm going to live by that standard. So to live with more conviction is to live in a more kind of disciplined, you know, according to your own perceptions of things. I think the danger is in philosophy as well, it's always very relativistic. So it's like, but, you know, it's only what you believe that is. It's not, there's not actually what it is. So, you know, as a person, I feel like we're all in a bit of a society like that where it's like, it's just whatever you make it to be. Whereas like I really have been on a kind of a mission recently to live with more of like no, actually that's what I think. So I'm going to, you know, and that's all to say as a background that I've for a long time disliked social media because of, you know, the way that it impacts society. I think it's wrong on a whole. And much like people think animal cruelty is bad, so I'm a vegan, I think social media is bad, so I've gone off social media.
Don't you think there's some benefits to it though? Like, I've considered the idea of let's get off Facebook, let's get off Snapchat, and then I go to message someone and I message them on Facebook or I message them on Snapchat, and I'm like, I mean, I am so bad at technology. Setting up this podcast was like a nightmare for me because I don't know how to use computers, man. But when it comes to like social media, I need that to communicate with someone else.
Yeah, it's been a little bit difficult. It's only been a couple of weeks that I've like just not used Messenger basically, and I've already deleted Instagram, been off Snapchat forever. Like, so all I'm using is messaging on like a phone, like traditional, and in phone call. Yeah. That's it. But yeah, I think part of that idea of living with conviction is being willing to make sacrifices where you think they're appropriate. So if I think that something is wrong and I genuinely believe that, then I should be like willing to at least accept some of the ramifications of that decision, you know? Again, with the vegan example, for, you know, I might like eating meat, but if animal cruelty and I genuinely believe that's wrong, then I'm willing to make that sacrifice for something that I believe is actually worthwhile.
Yeah. So, are you a vegan?
No, I'm not.
You're not? Would you consider being a vegan?
Actually, I was thinking about this the other day. Probably, I think it's a good thing to be vegan. I respect people who are, because I think it's generally better for the planet and everything. But yeah, I'd have to get into a position where I was like rich enough to afford good food.
You're studying philosophy, so that's probably going to be a long time.
Yeah. If ever. But yeah, like I could get by with less. And I think that's the mantra for giving up social media as well. It's like, yeah, it's harder, but that's sometimes a good thing, you know. So
I'm loving this because we live in this society now where we're wrapped up in this postmodernism idea, which is obviously complex, but it involves a lot of post-truth. Everything's relative, like you were saying. And I think that's just not a great way to live your life if you're always like that. But there's probably, and this is what I'm struggling with, there's probably some truth or some at least validity to the ideas that postmodernists have in that everything is relative, and that your beliefs can be wrong, and they probably are wrong. So you want to live with conviction. What do you do with that?
Yeah.
What do you do with the idea that maybe social media really is a thing that you should have in your life?
Yeah, that's a great question, and there's a lot in there. I think definitely agree with your assessment of where we are as a society. Like, we can all feel that way, and yeah, absolutely. something that everyone has to face. It's like, okay, you have your own beliefs and that's well and good, but you step outside of that and you look at yourself objectively and you're like, okay, well, that doesn't give me the right to enforce that on everyone, you know. And you ask yourself naturally, okay, well, how do I know that I am correct, and how do I justify the fact that I have like a certain position? For me, at least, the only answer I have is that I am me, and so therefore at least have a right to my own perception and view and opinion, you know. That is to say, like, I can defend that rationally, and I can, you know, justify the fact that I have an opinion. And, you know, sometimes you do have to not push it on other people, but just at least defend yourself. Kind of like the self-defense law. If someone's coming at you, you have a right to defend yourself. So because you were born in a certain way, and because you grew up in a certain household and lived a certain life, you have a right to your own opinions, and there's nothing wrong with that. So that's at least the starting base, is like you're at least neutral with everyone else, which is what most people take for granted, is like your views are equal to mine at the very least. What you might be talking about in terms of conviction, because then you're like, okay, well, if everyone's right, then that means everyone's wrong, you know? And that's where the postmodernist view kind of breaks down. It's how do we pick, how do we, while we can justify our own views and having them, how do we know that we shouldn't just discard them for someone else's then, if we're all equal? And yeah, I think that's the goal of philosophy in a big way, is to try and find a way forwards from that in a rational and logical way. But I think for most people, it's enough just to accept yourself in a way, you know, and to say, well, look, I might not have all the answers, and just to remain humble. And if you can do that, then you can just be like, well, I accept that I've got my own view. I've accepted that it's justifiable that I hold it, and that it's equally as good as anyone else's. And then all you can do is just move forward humbly and honestly and try to collect truth and, you know, bring that into your own sort of view of the world in as much of a kind of doing it due diligence way, where you're not rejecting something just for the sake of it scares you or in a prejudiced way, but you're like assimilating it into your body of knowledge in a very sort of open way, while still retaining what you believe and the experiences that you've had and where you've come from, however irrational they might be.
So I'm loving absolutely the integrity. My question is, you say that all views are equal, but aren't some views more informed, more justified, and better than others? People's opinions, like, they're not... I don't think that my opinion about... Pick your topic. My opinion about Catholicism wouldn't be any at all equal to the Pope's opinion about Catholicism.
Right.
Some people are better informed in some areas. Where do we draw that line?
Yeah, that's...
And when do you listen to yourself, and when do you listen to the experts?
Yeah, that's an interesting point.
Just to add one more conjunction to that, when do you listen to yourself? When do you listen to the experts? And when do you decide that someone needs to shut up and you don't need to listen to them?
Yeah, that's a great point. I think when do you listen to the experts? That comes back to what I was saying about being humble. So knowing when and being open. So knowing when someone has something to contribute. When do you listen to yourself? After you've listened to the experts. So when you make the final call and when you assimilate that into yourself, you're allowed, by nature of everything that I've talked about with the justifiableness and the equality side, to synthesize that in a way that isn't out of contact with the world and doesn't, you know, make it fully subjective, but appreciates the totality of the context. So you're saying, you know, I might not have all the answers. I'm going to listen to this expert because I respect them and I'm humble enough to take someone else's opinion into account. But ultimately, I have final say on what I draw from that, as long as I'm willing to put the caveat on that I'll only assimilate something in as honest and open and objective a way as possible, so that you're not lying to yourself ultimately. So for example, if an expert tells you, oh, you need to go and do this, and you say, okay, well, I'm going to take that opinion, I'm going to think about it, but if you're bringing it in and you make that executive judgment on that information in a way that is just out of whack completely, and if you just were more open and more honest and real with yourself, you'd be like, oh, okay, actually, I do need to listen to them, rather than like, I'm afraid of that, no, I'm going to say no. Then yeah, ultimately you'd be lying to yourself. So it's best in everyone's interest just to make a rational, truthful, honest judgment, and that can take into account both what you've drawn in externally as well as what you feel. And, you know, there's definitely a whole lot of emotional experience and sort of non-reason based stuff in there to be like brought into the mix. And what was the third one?
The third one is when do I tell someone to be quiet? When is it okay to
say that they're wrong?
Not just to say that someone's wrong, but to eliminate another person's voice. So, I mean, I'm gonna bring it back to social media, which we started talking about. Lately, there's been a series of people that have been, for example, have had their Twitter accounts deleted. So Donald Trump, for example, right, who had the opinion, well, at least he presented himself as having the opinion of the election was stolen and we need a march on the Capitol and all that sort of stuff. When is it okay to say that is an uninformed, uneducated, dangerous opinion? Let's delete that account.
Yeah, look, that's something I think it's a very difficult question to answer, and that's something, you know, with the cancel culture stuff that people are grappling with right now. And I don't know if it's a sort of question that we've ever had to be faced with as a society before, because we've never had the amount of mass media reach that the internet's granted ever in the society. So, you know, whereas before the only contrast you have in precedent is, someone's printed something in the newspaper, that's probably the best way that they could have like reached a mass audience or like put it on TV. When do we decide to censor that? And yeah, it's never been an easy answer for like Western governments to make. If you're in China, even with the internet, they're still censoring things and they're saying, no, that's right, that's wrong. We have a real issue in Western society, arguably for a good reason, to let people speak their mind. I personally think that it's more dangerous to silence people at our discretion rather than just let them say what they want. But that just comes down to freedom of speech. Were you meaning more kind of specifically to
specifically? Let's like zone in on we'll zone in on the Donald Trump one for now, and then I mean there's a plethora of examples that we can talk about. But would you say that deleting Donald Trump's Twitter account was the right thing to do?
No, I don't think so. I think that the more people that we sort of try to stomp down, the more it'll just bubble up and come back against people. Because, you know, for a lot of people out there, they don't really care about what Donald Trump's saying. They're more interested in the fact that he's not allowed to say it. And that's more of a powerful message, you know. You don't have to be one of the people that's checking Trump's Twitter feed and like all clued into everything that he's saying. The easiest message for you to pick up and that'll travel across everyone is Donald Trump's Twitter got cancelled. And that's much more powerful. So I think it's even against the interests of what the people are trying to do by shutting it down. That's just going to backfire. So I don't think for them it'd be the right option. And arguably, if you're on Donald Trump's side, obviously you want his Twitter to stay open as well. So I think generally speaking, it's a bad choice all around.
So I tend to agree with you, but I'm going to play devil's advocate because that's what I'm like.
Go for it.
There's people marching into the Capitol building. Donald Trump is tweeting, let's march on the Capitol building. He's not tweeting anything about let's get out of the Capitol building and let's not hurt anyone until after the fact. That easily could have gone down violently, and it easily could have ended in, you know, incredible harm to senators and congressmen and police officers, and in fact it did end up in the deaths of a couple of people. Is there not a line where, like, if Donald Trump was to come out and say, okay, pull out your guns and start shooting at any senators that vote to impeach me, at that point, is it okay to censor his speech?
Well, yeah. I think if you knew for a fact that it was going to cause violence, then yes, absolutely censor it. But it's just so hard to connect the two. Like, you'd have to be really insane to think, like, the Donald told me to do this, you know? Even if he explicitly was like, go and kill that person, he's not making you kill that person. Even if he literally says it, whispers it into your ear right next to you. If he threatens you, yeah, okay, that's different. But there's no such thing as being able to be threatened. Like, I'm assuming we're not putting a threat through Twitter in this, you know, theoretical. Or there's no blackmail, there's no bribery, there's no, like, underhandedness. That's what, you know, the police would have to figure out is, like, or lawyers, I guess. You know, how far can someone go as being like the devil on the shoulder, telling like potentially crazy people to like do something illegal. Yeah, look, it would have to be a law situation at that point, but yeah, I think philosophically speaking, I guess, or at least how I feel, yeah, I'm very much on the opinion that someone can't be at fault for simply putting up a suggestion. At the end of the day, it's up to the people themselves who perform the action, like the onus is on them. Yes, I don't, there's no, that's like saying, okay, what if you put someone right up on the very edge of a cliff or something? You could say like Donald is putting them everywhere, like a millimeter before doing the act, Donald's putting the gun in their hand, and so yeah, I don't agree with that. Like, he shouldn't be doing that. But as soon as you start telling people, oh, well, you haven't actually done something, but we're going to censor you because it was leading there, we're just ending up in some sort of like Orwellian 1984 thought crime territory.
So I'm with you. My problem is that, well, it's not even a problem. It's just my thought, if I'm thinking about it from the other side, is that not everyone is as rational as you. So you're obviously, I think you strike me as a pretty rational bloke.
I hope so.
Right? And you seem like someone that's going to be able to go, okay, like exactly what you were saying before. Okay, here's an opinion of someone else. Let's bring it in. Let's listen to it. If it's rubbish, I'm going to throw it out. If it's at least some validity, I'm going to look into it a bit deeper and see if I can apply it to my life. You're an awesome philosopher. Unfortunately, in our society, people don't think like that.
Totally.
Right? And the easiest thing to do most of the time is to take advice from someone especially someone that's in an authority position, and just go, okay, I'm just going to follow that because it's easier. It's cognitively easier. It's way easier to follow. You don't need to think about it. You don't want to think about it. Does the Don not have some sort of responsibility to avoid messaging to those people in a way that's going to cause them to do those bad things?
Yeah, really like we're going on that train of thought. I think the Donald and anyone else as an individual does not have the right to censor themselves for the sake of, oh, maybe there's people out there that, because it's like, where does it end? How do you know who's out there, who's listening? Yeah, absolutely. There's going to be a ton of crazy people when you transit to 1 million people. There's always going to be some people who disagree with you, who love you, who are like willing to jump off a bridge, whatever. So like, we can't go down that path, I don't think, to say it's on the Donald. Is there a responsibility somewhere that someone should be taking to censor the Donald, though, for the sake of all those people? And yeah, potentially, and it would be Twitter in that situation. It would be like the governing body. And it's interesting that it is the American president or former American president, because, as a power structure, it's like, okay, well, who comes after the president? It's like Twitter does, because the American government isn't going to censor the Donald, but Twitter might, because they're kind of beyond countries. Anyway, but yeah, just to... sorry, now I've lost my train of thought. What were you saying about just before?
I think what I was saying was...
Whose responsibility is it?
Well, not just whose responsibility is it, but there is people out there that are not going to go through the rational process that you want them to go through.
Right.
So what do we do about that issue there? And if we're not going to censor speech, what are we going to do so that if the Donald says march on the Capitol, we don't end up in a situation where there is people inside of the Capitol with weapons against a handful of police officers and a couple of defenseless senators?
Yes, yeah. It's really tricky. There's just so much in there. That's why I'm just sort of scratching my head, because it's like saying, should people who don't know how to play by the rules of, the society that we're in, or who can't sort of, understand when the Donald says march on the Capitol, that, don't get your guns and go and kill someone. I don't know. It really, there's like a deep sort of underlying personal philosophy that goes into answering that sort of question. It's like, do you believe that we should water down the rules of society, or we should, make things easier for people who, for the lowest common denominator? But then does that lead to a society that progressively gets watered down such that more people are drafted into that lowest common denominator? I suppose, like, I'm trying to think of a good example, but...
You can lower if we lower our standards, then what might happen is everyone lowers their standards. If we lower our standards to make it permissible for the lowest common denominator, then we get more people in that group.
Yeah, absolutely. And so in the sense of the Donald and the Twitter case, you could say, okay, well, we need to censor these things because we have a moral responsibility to look after the people in our society who would do these horrible things, and we have to protect them from themselves, right? Because we can't trust, effectively what's being said, we can't trust these gun-toting people in America who would follow the Trump into the Capitol because they're going to do that. So we have to preempt them, and we have to save them from themselves and save them from doing this thing by, and it just gets really convoluted and complicated when you start doing that sort of thing. But it's a fair question to say, well, what alternative do we have?
Yeah, so like at the moment, what we've been discussing is where should the responsibility lie? At the moment, it seems to be the case that the responsibility has been lying with social media companies, with companies like Twitter, with companies like Facebook, where information is distributed to the rest of the population. They've taken it upon their shoulders to censor that, what information we should and shouldn't hear. Do you think that's problematic? Because to me, I'm like, Mark Zuckerberg, like, I'm going to insult Mark Zuckerberg right now, but a computer geek, and I've listened to Mark Zuckerberg talk, and I'm not sure if he's a robot or not.
Or an alien.
Or an alien. And I think we could make a decent philosophical case that he might be. Why should that guy be deciding who is and isn't speaking?
Yeah, it's weird, isn't it? And I think that's part of my sort of rebellion against Facebook, and most people feel that way. They're a bit uncomfortable about the fact that social media companies have so much power. I really like
what they were doing with the bloody news in Australia.
Yeah, exactly. I was about to say, I kind of really like that the Australian government's standing up to them a bit, and there's a bit of pressure being put on them, because it's just ridiculous. These companies can just do whatever they want. They operate out of US, but they've got this weird international sort of power. And they've called it before the attention economy. Like these days, where you put your focus is where the money is. Data and whatever, obviously, but in terms of actual man hours, like the time that people have spent and like are pouring into just like being on the phone, on Facebook, on Netflix, whatever, that naturally comes with power. Like that, people's attention is the economy, and if for no other reason than that, it's weird that these companies have so much of a pull on so many hours of attention of the human population on planet Earth. It's like, if any one thing has that much focus, it's probably a bad thing, especially when it's not tied to like an actual responsibility.
I'm really, really interested about the point that you brought up concerning the fact that what Facebook wants is your attention, right? And one of the big issues with that is that what Facebook feeds you is exactly what they think you want to see half the time.
Yeah, it's weird.
Right? So, like, I mean, I like to get balanced views on things. I've got I don't stand anywhere on the political spectrum. Well, at least I don't think I do. So, I like to like different pages to get different opinions of things. So, maybe 6 months ago now, I liked Ben Shapiro.
Okay.
Just to get, I like getting the conservative look on things. Next minute, I'm just flooded with conservative information. Every time I turn on my bloody Facebook, it's the conservative view of what Joe Biden has just done, or the latest Joe Biden gap.
Yeah, you're caught in the algorithm.
Yeah, I'm caught in the algorithm. What the hell do we do, man?
Yeah, it's weird, isn't it? And the echo chamber, like, that's groupthink as well. People like hearing opinions that accord with their own. Obviously that's great, but yeah, it's a tough one. I think breaking out of that being set in the ways is the only way to do that is really to delete and possibly like if you want to get back into social media, make a new account. That's all I can think of, because once the algorithm has like its tendrils in you, it's like, oh, well, we know what you want, and it's so hard to deviate from that. Like, you can think of going down a path, and there's like a lot of like forks in the road, like later on down the path and stuff. It's so hard to get back to that initial, to change direction, let's say. Like, you have to go through so much backlog, and like once you've already begun that, then the algorithm's already sort of like bookmarked you in a certain area. They're like, okay, well, you're heading southwest, so like it's so hard to like do that turnaround. But Yeah, I don't think it's a good thing, obviously. I think most people would agree that people are kind of drilling down into just like one area of thought because of the groupthink, because of the echo chamber that gets created. I don't know if I'd have any sort of suggestion. I mean, for myself at least, I just try and like get away from all of it as much as possible because, you know, there's this perception like more is better, but the human brain can only really like do so much, and there's so much information available that's just an overload, I think. You know, I think that's probably another topic we could go into, but I'm very interested in sort of how quickly technology has come about and how woefully inadequate we are as humans biologically to deal with it. So
that is fantastic, because this is a big area of interest for mine. It seems to me like, and I've got huge problems with the Dan Tahan changes in educational fees. I think just amplifies ignorance, basically, because over the last, well, I mean, you can go, if you want to talk about, you know, science, you can go back to the ancient Greeks, but if you want to talk about the rapid exponential expansion of science, you can go to the last couple of 100 years, maybe industrial revolution, around the time of the philosophers Bacon and stuff, that really outlined a scientific method. Since then, we've just seen this rapid technological growth. I mean, I can't believe the fact that when I was 10, there was no such thing as iPhones. Now, every single person has an iPhone. Like, look, my iPhone's sitting right here on the bench. I couldn't tell you the last time that I've been, you know, 100 meters from that thing. And I don't consider myself to be someone so, like, techie. And at the same time, and you know, we've got nuclear weapons with, like, the next war is going to be fought by people that are, like, basically playing computer games, directing drones, right? We've got all this technological power, and we ain't got a shred more wisdom than what we've... I mean, maybe a little bit, but our wisdom is not going at that rate.
Yeah, it's scary. Like, that's a good way of putting it. Like, the wisdom that we've developed to be able to, you know, pilot these things in a direction that's good for everyone is way less than, you know, the capacity and the power there. Like, I often think, you know, the ability that we have, say, through Facebook or whatever, to chat to someone across the world, that's basically a godlike power, you know? Like, if you could go back 100, give it a bit more, but, you know, someone would say, like, oh my God, you can communicate with someone on the other side of the world, which is literally physically what we can do. That's fact. It's not science fiction. They'd be like, holy crap, like, that's like a godlike power. That's amazing. And when you give average people godlike powers, then it screws with them. You know, it's like, that's not the natural order of things that we've had for, you know, thousands, millions of years, whereby we've been so used to using our ears or, like, knowing people who are down the road. So, yeah, obviously, I think it's just, like you said, the capacity and the power without the ability to understand exactly the ramifications of that and the spillover.
Like, it seems to me that when things are out of balance, bad things happen, right? And that's, you can go, with that idea, you can literally go down to, like, it's almost like it's a law of the universe, right down to subatomic particles of nature. If you've got a nucleus, within the nucleus, there's repulsive forces between the like-charged protons, and then there's a strong attractive... Is it strong? Yeah, a strong attractive force or weak attractive force. I haven't done physics for a while. That is able to bind those protons together. So there's attraction and repulsive forces. And if they're balanced, our nucleus is happy. When they become unbalanced, that's when we get nuclear decay. Now, you can see that in a huge variety of things throughout the universe. And I'm thinking that's the same with science and wisdom, right? They're almost like opposed forces. We've got way, like, our science is so strong, our wisdom's just not there, right? We've got nuclear weapons. We've got enough nuclear weapons that if we wanted to click that button, you'd run to the supermarket and prepare for the nuclear winter. Hopefully, you're not panic buying toilet paper. There would be more important things to buy. And it seems to me, coming back to Dan Tahan and this focus on science, this focus on technology, this focus on engineering, what are we going to do? Just get everyone to create an artificial intelligence and have no one considering the fact that that artificial intelligence eventually is going to have to understand ethics. We're going to have to program value into it. And if we've got no one considering values...
Yeah, that's so true. I think another analogy could be like the head and the heart. So science is the head and philosophy or wisdom is the heart. So, and you need both, obviously. But yeah, you've got so much on science, so much on these like bricks and mortar. Like, I understand, from a government perspective, it's priorities. You've got to get people fed, you've got to keep them in housing. So they're looking at the economy and they're saying, what's the future? Where are the jobs? And it's science, it's nursing, it's all that sort of thing. But much like we were saying before, and I think what you were alluding to with the echo chamber and the it's kind of drilling into this future of saying, okay, well, if we're not investing in certain things and we are investing in others, then it's only going to end up with a surplus of all of this stuff and like a very little amount of the other, right? So we'll have so much engineering, so much science, which is great. But like you said, no wisdom to do it properly. And if there's no investment through the university reforms in that sort of wisdom side, then yeah, there will be problems. There will be a lack of balance. There'll be a lack of heart, for better, word, of someone actually thinking, okay, well, how, like ethics or like the reason that we do the things that we do, rather than just, we do it just so we can eat and get paid, and which is all well and good and that's important, but I agree there needs to be a balance between the two.
I think a large part of the problem has to do with the way that we consider progress. So with science, it's so easy to see the progress. Like, I can pick up my phone and call someone on the other side of the world, and I couldn't do that 300 years ago, and I can go, that's progress. But when it comes to subject areas like ethics, subject areas like understanding the nature of consciousness, which is what we're going to have to do if we develop an artificial intelligence that is conscious, or maybe conscious because we don't have a clue. With philosophy, the problem to me seems to be that we don't understand what progress would look like, right? And we don't, like, a huge debate in philosophy is whether philosophy makes progress.
Yeah, it's a good question.
And we still draw on the ethics of Aristotle. We're not talking about Aristotle's physics anymore. And Aristotle spent a lot of his time doing physics, right? We don't even talk about, we do, but we've moved on from Newtonian to Einstein physics, right? And a huge part of the problem is going, okay, what is progress in philosophy? And how can we start making progress in philosophy? Yeah,
that's such an interesting area as well. Progress, I think, has been defined as like this ideal of humanity, like we're here to progress. But I'll put that to the side anyway. But yeah, in terms of, does philosophy actually make progress? A lot of the time it feels like no, is the intuitive answer, because we just end up where we started. So how can we move anywhere or like have achieved anything if we just go in a circle, But yeah, I think there's something really attractive about that idea that, you're born and then you die, this like circular kind of Zen, almost like Buddhist sort of all is one, like, yeah. And that's definitely contrasted with, the Western idea of progress, which is like, it's definitely a straight line and it goes forwards, and, we can measure it with science and these other achievements. But when it comes to the more philosophical side, it's almost like the Eastern sort of idea of this like circular, like continuation, where we don't make progress, arguably, in the same way that we do in the Western style. That seems a lot more powerful. And I don't know if we've got a Western equivalent, because, and you'd probably know a bit better than I would in terms of history of philosophy and sort of some of the great thinkers and what they've contributed. But yeah, it's hard to say exactly what of worth we've gained from that at the very least hasn't been blown away by like postmodernist deconstructioning.
Yeah, deconstruction. Don't bring up Derrida with me. I'm losing my mind.
And, we've come so far because of the achievements of great people in the past, but now we've definitely hit a point where it's turned in on itself, and you do say, well, okay, well, what was the point of all the progress? Maybe the Western idea of progress wasn't correct. Maybe it's more like, maybe it's more like circular, or there's other options, I guess.
So I want to bring this back to your idea of conviction at the start, and I'm going to attack it now, given what we've just said. So, if you look at some of the great thinkers, say great scientific thinkers, thinkers like Bohr, thinkers like Francis Bacon, Rutherford, I think, is one. All these guys that made huge steps forward in science. It seems to me that if you look at their lives, so often you'd say that life was orientated towards the good, and that person was able to achieve so much, right? And now we look at science now, and we go, well, science has the capacity to kill us all, to put it lightly, right?
Yeah.
And those people lived with conviction. They did the right thing. They actually made more progress than 99% of the population. And now we're in a situation where we're reaping the benefits of what they've done. But it also seems to be the case that it could cause a ridiculous amount of harm. And I've often had this thought with like ethical debate, or just debate in general philosophy, where you might be really strong about an idea and really confident that it's going to produce good in the world, but you put that idea out there, and once that idea is out there and it's outside of your control, you don't know whether it's going to actually cause a lot of harm. So how do you reconcile that with living with conviction? Because it seems, and you see philosophers all the time that are like this, they're just like, they're numb with indecision.
Well, look, I think I can give an easy answer and then expand upon it, but the idea probably would be to do more good than harm, And so...
But how can you control that?
If you...
Not how can you control that. I'm taking it almost axiomatically that you can't control that. So how do we act in the world knowing that it might be the case that despite our best efforts and our best intentions, the world might have been better if we didn't act?
Well, I think we can't not act. The only option we have is to move forward, as in, like, we have to consume, we have to be a part of the world, we have to eat, whatever, sleep, make money, essentially. So we have to do things. So that rules out the idea of just, like, I don't know, suicide, if we're being radical, because it's like, no, then I can't do no wrong, no good or no right, or no right, no wrong.
Well, we have to act, right? Because the decision to not act is itself a decision in itself, an action.
And that's a fantastic point as well. Yeah, so we have to act. So we're justified in doing whatever we can. The only thing we can do is to proceed in as good a fashion as we can. And I think that's why conservatism is such a powerful sort of ideology, because it grants people, it gives people that impression that if I push too hard and I go too far too fast, then I could do more harm than good. Whereas if we move forward as a society slowly, with caution, and knowing that we all have the capacity for great harm to each other, then we'll move in a more sort of, we'll take smaller steps and we'll go slower, but it'll be safer and it'll be more kind of consistent. And yeah, I think applying that ideology to people's lives, that's pretty much how most people live. They don't go out and put all of their money at the casino on black,
No, that might be a wild time.
Yeah, it's like, that would be great, but I think...
It would be great if you win.
yeah, exactly. And likewise, you don't go out and just see, oh, okay, maybe I'll harm a bunch of people, but I could also maybe, like, make a lot of things good. So people set out with good intentions, and they should set out cautiously, but that doesn't stop them, in your example, from eventually causing great harm. I've got a couple of, examples, like, I'm not sure if it was necessarily Einstein or if it was just attributed to him, but I believe it was him. In his, formulating his famous equation, I think it contributed to the creation of nuclear weapons. And I might be misrepresenting that, but...
I forget who it was, but I'm pretty sure because I've looked into this a little bit. What was actually hilarious about the nuclear weapons example is that there was a conference, a scientific conference around, like, middle of World War II, I think it was, in the US, and one guy was like, the nuclear, because this was when the idea of releasing the energy of the atom, so E equals mc squared, so that's Einstein. When that idea came to light, everyone was like, wow, there's so much energy in an atom of uranium, right? And then there was a conference like, well, are we going to be able to release this energy? And the decision at the conference was, no, we're not going to be able to release this energy. And the next day, seriously, the next day, I think it was Rutherford, but I can't be entirely sure. Was like, here's the maths. This is how it can be done.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, that's a great story. I love it. That's human nature in a nutshell.
Well, that's like the way that one's been used in the past is to talk about artificial intelligence.
Okay.
And it's been going, like, the idea is, like, at the moment we're like, oh no, you can't create an artificial intelligence that's autonomous. That's not possible, right? Like, how are you going to create something that thinks for itself? Right? And it might be, and we're going, oh no, that might not happen for another 60 years or another 100 years or another 200 years. We think that until it happens tomorrow. So the time to act on those sorts of things is probably, and the time to start considering those scenarios is probably now, before it's too late with these sorts of things.
Absolutely. Yeah, look, I couldn't agree more. I think there's already, like, as far as I know, some sort of charter of, like, scientists and, like, top of the field that are like, we need to talk about AI and we need to, like, develop protocols and, like, rules and guidelines and basically to stop some sort of AI apocalypse, essentially. So yeah, absolutely, I agree with that. But yeah, with the Rutherford example, I think that's a really good encapsulation of human nature, because it's like, I want to find out about this. It's curiosity, and curiosity killed the cat. It goes down to, how do you structure your society and what's important? I think Western society, for at least the last 300 years, if not more, has had the impression of building towards a utopia, right? That's, even if people don't think of it that way, that's the goal of Western society, is to get to a point where there is no scarcity, everyone has resources, you can do whatever you want, you don't have to necessarily work if you don't want to, and everything's just taken care of, right? Ideally, I guess, by robots or whatever. And that is the justification for science, even though there is all of this, like, harm, even though you can say, yes, we have bombs and whatever, we have nuclear warheads, but we've also got hospitals and we've got so many more people above the poverty line. So it's going back to that discussion of, you were saying, how do we make sure that we don't do more harm than good through our lives, and if we live lives of conviction? And the secular sort of Western view on that would be, well, even if you have to break a few eggs to make the omelette, it's worth it, because at the end you're getting something better. It's pretty brutal, and that's why we do have, a lot of bad outputs of science in the modern world that we have to deal with. I mean, no one could have predicted, I guess, that the bad side would begin to outweigh the good, which is what I think a lot of people would start to be agreeing with in the modern day.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I would go as far to make that statement just yet, because, I mean, in 2000, the United Nations said, okay, we want to halve the global poverty by 2020, and I'm pretty sure it was done by something like 2007, right? We're lifting people out of poverty at a greater rate that's ever been done before. You're far more likely to have diabetes now than die of starvation.
Yeah.
We're doing a tremendous amount of good. So I don't know if we can make that claim yet. Obviously, that is just another thing that's uncertain, right? And we live in this world of uncertainty. What I'm really interested in hearing from you, talking about Dan in particular now, you've mentioned conviction, but, like, what sort of other principles do you adopt in your life that helps you make decisions in these situations of uncertainty? Like, do you go, like, so, like, I used to have, well, I might still have, I don't know anymore, I used to have very consequentialist ethics, so I used to look at everything like, make a pros and cons list, add up the utilities and see where we go from there. There's Kantian worldviews, and you just act only on that maxim, which at the same time you can will to become a universal law of nature. Never lie. What's Dan do?
Yeah, So the first thing that sprung to my mind was this idea of kind of like, it sounds cliche, but like a karmic balance, I suppose. So I sort of feel like, whereas the consequentialist would say, all right, I got to make sure that I make these calculations and I do that, I'm just like, I can't afford to, draw up lists every time I want to do something and think if it's good or right or wrong. I just take for granted that a lot of the stuff that I do in life, even if it is good, will have negative side effects. So the fact that I eat meat means that I contribute to global warming, I contribute to animal slaughter. The fact that I wear clothes made in Bangladesh means that I'm probably, complicit in some sort of workshop somewhere. So in that sense, I've come to terms, and I think most people should, arguably, with the fact that you're complicit in one way or another with a lot of harm in the world. But I counterbalance that with the idea that, for starters, I don't have a choice in that. I have to wear clothes, I have to eat food. Obviously I can improve that position in a more ethical way over time, but as it stands, I'm just born into this and I have to, move forward and do that. So this idea of sort of karmic balance is the fact that I just do my best to, in the position that I can and with the resources I can, to honestly sacrifice as much as I can in a way that's reasonable to make up for the inevitable fact that I'm producing, all of this other shite, on the other end of the scale. So that's one thing that I sort of live by, and it helps me to make decisions, is just to say, well, honestly, I'm going to just try and do the best that I can.
Is it almost like an intuitive thing? Just you have some sort of intuitive grasp on the good. Follow your intuition.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's saying how much can I put in, if that makes sense. Like, I'm trying to think of an example, but like I don't measure these things, I guess. I just know it's like, okay, I don't even look at the debt side, which is like my karmic debt, let's say, where I'm complicit in the slave workshops and whatever, because you could never calculate that accurately. And even if you could, it'd be pointless. You just know that you're always in debt in some degree. So you should always be pushing and working hard to counterbalance that by doing as many good things as you can. So if you can go to a homeless shelter, that's fantastic. You don't have to necessarily, but if you were to do that, it would definitely contribute to alleviating the debt of the fact that you eat meat, or, you know what I mean? So for some people, it's very like, either it is or it isn't. It's very black and white. For me, it's just like my life is a balance of how much good I can do versus how much bad I try and minimize, and minimize the bad, but also do the good for the sake of upending that balance and making it more positive. Some people will say, oh, well, in that sense, you should just like sell everything and give it all to the poor. And it's like, no, I think you do have responsibility to yourself and to like your parents and to be able to live a normal life and just have a balance. And you'll never know exactly whether you're fully in the right or in the wrong on that karmic balance. But all you have to do is just try and like do the best and minimize the harm. So that's quite an easy way to make decisions. It's just like do as good as you can. In terms of what makes something good to do, that's another tricky question. I guess, obviously you could run through all of the utilitarianist, all the et cetera, theories. I'm not a big believer in having one set of rules. I don't think it's flexible enough for the complexity of life, and I don't think it does yourself as a person due justice. You should be able to like change your view depending on the situation in a way that isn't destroying like your own integrity. So if a situation calls for something and you're like, oh, but I'm against this completely, and like I've always been against that, but it's like going to save someone's life, for example, then obviously there's priorities there, and we can all agree that needs to be flexibility in that sense. So as a whole, I don't make any sort of massive judgments where I'm like, oh yeah, it's utilitarian, it's all the way, like I always apply this one theory. I just take it as it comes, and I think you have to be aware as a person, like one should be aware that you'll never get it right, like it's only ever as close as you can get to what you think would be like a good outcome for yourself, good outcome for the other person. But yeah, as you said before with the intuition side, I think we all know to some degree what's going to be good, and it's quite often the difficult part is admitting to yourself that it's not what you would want to do, but it's what you should do, So like, it's very rare that the right thing to do is also the easy and fun thing to do. Like, that's awesome when it is that way. It's like, yes, it feels so good. But more often than not, it's like, actually have a discussion with yourself and think, okay, I don't have to apply theory here. I don't have to, whatever. I know that I should be doing something good because of the karmic balance side of things. And I know what is right, to some degree. And you just remove yourself from that in terms of like your own selfishness. Like, oh, it'll be harder to do that, or I won't enjoy that. But it's like, no, but it's still the right thing to do, not the least because of how you feel about it.
Do you think that we're overcomplicating it in some sense? Like, we sit around and we have discussions, or at least some of us do, and all of us at least think about these things in our lives. We think about the infinite complexity of the universe. We think about the number of calculations that we might have to do. We consider all these alternate scenarios. We think up principles. We think of counterexamples. Might just be better to say, screw that, let's just follow our intuition, because most of our intuitions has a pretty good grasp on the good anyway.
Yeah, I think so. For the large part, it's not a matter of accurately seeing what's right and what's wrong in a situation. It's about the will to complete that and to choose the right option. So I don't think it's like a clarity problem for most people. It's like, I know what's right majority of the time, unless it gets really, really shaky and difficult. And in those situations where it's shaky, you'd be excused for making the wrong choice by most people because everyone else could see. It's like, okay, that's a tough call. But most of the time, it's actually like 80-20. Majority of the time, it's I know what's right. It's just, do I have the balls to back it up and to actually do what needs to be done? Not in what needs to be done as in like, oh, kill one person to save 5 or whatever. But like just to say, oh, it'll be hard and it'll be painful, but I know that it's the right thing to do. And like corruption is like the easiest example. You see these like third world countries that are being overrun by dictators. What happens as soon as they push one out? The new one comes in, probably, honestly, with good intentions, but they're surrounded by wealth for the first time in their life. Before that, they were living in complete poverty with like 1 meal a day maybe, and they've got all this stuff. It's like, yeah, it's not easy to do the right thing. And you see why people don't make the right choice. Do they know what the right choice is? Yes. Will they lie to themselves so that they forget what the right choice is? Yes. So it's just about that process of like actually being real, and once you've identified what's real, just following through. I think that goes back to the conviction statement as well. It's like, for myself, if I honestly believe that social media is a problem in society, then how can I live with myself and support it? And I guess, yeah, you could argue, much like the dictator situation, oh, well, but I'm elected by the people, or I'm whatever. And in the Facebook situation, oh, but I need Messenger. It's like, yeah, you can do that forever, but it won't get you any closer to, a conclusion to that question, and you'll still have all those problems. So that's what conviction is. It's like, at least make a step forward, even if it means a sacrifice. Do the right thing by your country as a dictator, because otherwise it'll just be a perpetual cycle of and you'll be complicit in the deaths, and so it's like, I think, yeah, most people do know what's right, and they just need to follow through on it. Yeah, that being said, I think it does get tricky. Society doesn't help people to like have that clear view of what's right and what's wrong. I think it's accessible to people, but they have to declutter their life. They have to remove things. They have to remove distractions. And then they can sort of see things a bit more clearer.
Follow that heart. You need the heart. You need the heart with the brain.
Yes.
Follow your intuitions.
Absolutely. And absolutely, the head is great, and that's like a very important part of life, is living in a reasonable way. But yeah, the heart's necessary.
Well, I mean, I had the intuition to invite. Well, I didn't even invite. I just had the intuition to talk to you on this podcast, and that one certainly turned out for me. So thanks a lot, man.
Yeah.
You got to come back on sometime.
Yeah, I'd love to.
Thanks for having the conversation.
Yeah, cheers for having me. It's
awesome.
It's a great idea, and yeah, just happy to be a part of it.